She didn't expect it, not from you, not from the man who used to light up her phone with attention, warmth, and energy. She thought you'd fight for it. She thought you'd plead, chase, maybe even get angry. But instead, you went quiet. Not with bitterness, not with games, with peace. A silence that wasn't empty, but full of dignity. She thought her distance would pull you closer. That pulling back would make you react the way most men do. Panicking, explaining, proving, but you didn't. You just stopped showing up in the ways. She had quietly started expecting. You didn't reply as fast. You didn't reach out first. You didn't try to fix what she silently broke, and that shook her at first. She pretended it didn't matter. She told herself it was good. She needed space anyway. But deep down, something felt off. She noticed the silence. She noticed the shift. She noticed that the energy in the room was longer, orbiting around her, and while she smiled for others. Checked her phone late at night and convinced herself you were just being stubborn. Your absence started speaking louder than any message ever could, because when a man with emotional gravity goes silent, it doesn't create a void, it creates a mirror. And in that mirror she saw herself, and what she might have just lost. That was the moment, the beginning of her realization. The day she finally felt it. You went silent, and suddenly. She couldn't ignore the sound of her own heartbeat. It didn't happen all at once. First, it was the way her replies got shorter, the way her tone shifted, just enough to make you notice. She wasn't cold. Not exactly, but she wasn't warm either. She had started to drift. Slowly, silently, strategically. Maybe she was busy. Maybe life was just moving fast. That's what you told yourself. That's how you softened the truth. But deep down, you felt it. The emotional connection, once vibrant and alive, had started to dim. Not dead, just dim. And no matter how calmly, you played it. Something inside you began to tighten. Still, you didn't panic. You stayed present, observant. You didn't call her out. You didn't demand clarity. You watched. Like a man who knew exactly what she was doing but wasn't, ready to give her the satisfaction of reaction. That's what confused her. Because she thought you'd try harder. She thought you'd lean in, not lean back. But you didn't. And that's when it started. It's a quiet shift she never expected. Instead of chasing her, like every other man had, you let her drift. You let her wonder. You let her sit with the silence she created. You became still. Not passive. Powerful. You didn't retreat. You recalibrated. That scared her more than any confrontation ever could. Because women don't fear arguments. They fear stillness. A man who doesn't flinch. A man who knows himself. She started. Checking your energy. Not your messages. Your energy. Were you really that calm? Did you really stop needing her that quickly? Was it even real to begin with? That was her new obsession, not the attention you gave, the attention you withheld. Because in a world where men constantly seek her validation, you had become the one man she couldn't read. And in that unreadable silence, her power started to dissolve. The shift had begun. Not in you and her. She was testing you, not with malice, not with full awareness. But emotionally, deeply instinctively, it's how many women feel safe. By pulling back just enough to see how a man reacts. Will he chase? Will he fold? Will he beg for clarity she's not ready to give? You didn't know it at first. To you. It felt like confusion. Subtle changes in tone, mixed signals. Sudden coldness after warm connection. And that confusion hit you hard. Because just days ago, she was all in, laughing, connecting, even vulnerable. Now, she was emotionally miles away with no explanation. You tried to understand it, tried to read between the lines. But instead of reacting, you paused. Didn't explain your confusion, didn't demand answers she wasn't offering. You let it unfold. That silence, that pause, wasn't weakness. It was your quiet strength. A man grounded enough to feel confusion but not driven by it, and she noticed because most men fail this moment. They text paragraphs. They apologize for things they never did. They fight to re-win her warmth when it was never truly lost, just temporarily hidden. You didn't do that. You weren't cruel. You weren't cold. You were composed. It wasn't a strategy. It was instinct. The instinct of a man who values his peace more than the approval of someone. It's unsure. That's what rattled her. She didn't expect your stillness. She expected confusion to make you clumsy. She expected your masculine core to crack under her emotional pullback, but it didn't instead. You gave her exactly what she didn't even realize she needed: a mirror, a space, a moment to sit inside her own behavior. And that moment, it echoed, because in the silence of your non-reaction, you passed the test she didn't even know she was giving, and that changed everything. She wasn't pulling away from you. She was pulling away from what you represented, a man who made her feel seen. A man who didn't just look at her beauty, but into her behavior. That kind of presence. It's confronting. Because it touches something deeper than attraction. It touches her truth. And most people aren't ready to face themselves. So they run. She told herself stories to justify the distance. Maybe he's too intense. Maybe we move too fast. Maybe I just need space. But the truth, she felt exposed. Not because you pushed, but because you didn't. You weren't needy. You weren't reactive. You weren't clinging to her validation like a lifeline. You were steady. And that shook her. She didn't know how. To handle a man who wasn't trying to win her, cause all her life, attention equaled control. And suddenly, she had your attention, but not your obedience, not your emotional dependence, not your submission to her moods. That felt foreign. It's uncomfortable. It's even threatening. So she did what most do when they fear vulnerability. She created distance. She looked for faults. She found reasons to doubt the connection, but none of it was really about you. It was about how deeply your presence made her feel, how unfamiliar that feeling was. Because when a woman is used to controlling the pace, meeting a man who walks beside her, not behind her, throws off her rhythm. You didn't fit the pattern. You didn't chase the way others did. You didn't flinch when she pulled away, and now the silence you held became a spotlight, illuminating her own fears, her own resistance, her own emotional immaturity. She wasn't running from you. She was running from the part of herself that knew you were different, and deep down, the part that feared she'd ruin it before she ever understood it. Most men break here, the second she pulls away even slightly. They panic. They text more, not less. They over-explain. They apologize just to win back a smile that never asked for an apology. They abandon their center. They call it love. But what they're really doing is handing over their power to a woman who's still figuring out her own. And once she senses that, it's over, because she doesn't feel safe with a man who folds under pressure. She may not say it out loud, but her biology notices. Her instincts notice. Neediness is repelling, not because women are cruel, but because something deep within them craves grounded leadership. Not control, but presence. Not domination, but direction. And the moment you start chasing her emotion, instead of honoring your own, you lose the frame. You lose her respect long before you lose her affection. But you didn't do what most men do. You didn't explain yourself into oblivion. You didn't turn your heart into a sales pitch. You didn't beg her to see your worth. You knew your worth. And in that knowing, you gave her space, not out of fear, but out of strength. You weren't cold. You were centered. You weren't punishing her. You were protecting your peace. And in a world where most men default to desperation, your restraint became rare. Your stillness became valuable. That's what she couldn't ignore. Not just your absence, but how you handled it. You did nothing. And yet, you said everything. Because the man who stays composed when she pulls away does more to earn her respect than 1,000 sweet words ever could. You didn't lose her. You just refused to lose yourself. And that's what changed the story. She'll never say it out loud. She might not even admit it to herself. But deep down, she wanted you to hold. Not hold her. Hold your ground. She didn't want flowers. She didn't want apologies. She didn't want explanations drenched in emotion. She wanted to feel something she didn't know how to ask for. Masculine stillness. Because her pulling away wasn't a cry for attention. It was a cry for certainty. A test of your center. A moment where she needed to know, can this man stay rooted when my emotions swirl? Then you did? You didn't flinch. You didn't chase. You didn't play emotional tennis, returning every serve. You stayed calm, not as a tactic, but as a truth. She secretly hoped you'd pass the test. She needed to know you were different, not just in how you spoke, but in how you responded when things felt unclear. Because anyone can show up when it's easy, but very few remain grounded when the wind changes. You didn't fight her silence, you honored it. And that told her everything. That you're not here to convince someone to choose you. You're not here to perform emotional labor for a woman still searching for herself. You're not here to fill in the blanks when she goes quiet, because your value doesn't need to be explained. She wanted you to stay unshaken. You did. She wanted you to respect yourself more than her confusion. You did. And that's when something inside her began to shift. She didn't miss your attention, she missed your presence, the way it calmed the room, the way it made her feel like she didn't have to perform, the way it silently said, I'll be here if you're real, but I'll be gone if you're not. She didn't expect it, but she hoped for it, and now she can't forget it. At first she thought you were just giving her space. She assumed you'd come back around, that your silence was temporary, a phase, an emotional bluff. But days passed, then weeks. Didn't return like the others did. You didn't orbit her anymore. You didn't check in. You didn't try to relight a flame she'd poured water on. You became absent. Not physically, maybe, but energetically, in that silence. It started to echo. She checked your profile more than once, reread old messages, watched your story, scrolled to see who you were becoming without her, because she didn't expect the stillness to feel this loud, to take up space in her mind in ways your words never could. Her friends noticed something too. She talked about you more, asked indirect. Questions grew quieter when your name came up, because now the silence was speaking, and it was saying everything you never said aloud. You had boundaries. You had value. You had options. You weren't waiting. You were moving silently. She started questioning her own choice. Was it too soon to pull away? Did she misread your energy? Did she walk away from a man who was actually grounded, not perfect, but powerful? I know. As that thought crept in, so did emotion. Not because she lost control, but because she realized you never needed to be controlled in the first place. That's what made the silence hurt. Not the absence of attention, but the presence of dignity. You didn't use words, you didn't use anger. You just let the space speak. And in that space, she began to feel something rare: respect, regret, and reflection. You weren't trying to teach her a lesson. She was learning one anyway. Because real masculinity doesn't explain itself. It simply walks in truth and lets everything else adjust. It didn't hit her all at once. It crept in slowly, in the quiet moments when no one was around to distract her. In the late-night stillness, when her phone stayed silent, when she scrolled past the kind of man you used to be, and realized no one had filled that space. She had thought it would be easy, that you'd be just another moment, another chapter she could close without consequence. But instead, you became a mirror. Not because of what you did, but because of what you didn't do. You didn't chase. You didn't compete. You didn't try to convince her you were enough. You already knew you were, and now the silence she once welcomed was the very thing haunting her, because the way you disappeared wasn't loud. It wasn't bitter. It was graceful. And that grace left a mark. She saw your name again somewhere, a message thread, a mutual friend's story, a passing mention, and something in her dropped, because now your presence felt like absence. And your absence felt permanent. You had moved forward with calm, with purpose, with a life no longer orbiting hers, and the man she once pulled away from is now the man she silently admired from afar. You became the one who didn't fold. The one who didn't beg, the one who valued his peace more than her confusion. She didn't lose you in one big moment. She lost you in 100 small ones every time she expected you to come back, and you didn't. Now she knows. You weren't ordinary. You weren't another man who just wanted her. You were a man who chose her until she made it clear. She didn't know what to do with that kind of gift, and that realization cuts deeper than any goodbye. Because now, when she thinks of you, she doesn't remember the texts or the conversations, or even the laughter. She remembers the moment she felt your absence and knew it was her own doing. You're not just attractive, you're unforgettable. Some men speak with words, others speak with actions. But the rarest speak with silence and still leave echoes behind. You didn't disappear to punish her. You didn't stay silent to win a game. You simply understood one truth. A man grounded in his worth doesn't chase someone who questions. That kind of presence? It stays in the room long after you've walked out. You became the exception. Not because you played it cool, but because you were actually cool, calm, centered, bothered. That doesn't come from pretending. It comes from becoming a man who doesn't lose himself to win someone else. A man who doesn't beg for validation because his life already has meaning. With or without her. So keep building. Keep walking. Keep showing up for yourself in ways no one sees, because when you stop chasing people who aren't sure, you start attracting people who are certain. You don't need to explain your silence. You are the explanation, and the world remembers men like that. Not for what they said, but for how they walked away. Unforgettable, undeniable, unshaken. And now, she knows you were never gone. You simply rose,